Hi, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you're located. This is Dorothy Dalton from 3 Plus International. And today I'm here with my nephew, Harry Dalton, who's promised me absolutely he's not going to call me Auntie Dorothy. And interestingly, our work coincides, our business interests overlap. So Harry is involved in the physical safety business, and I'm involved in psychological and psychosocial safety. And we're going to be discussing something I read recently, which says that a workplace that tolerates unsafe conditions doesn't just risk physical injury, it guarantees psychological harm. And an interesting stat is about 50% of the workforce, wherever you are in the world, more or less feels physically unsafe at work. And Harry and I are going to discuss the implications of that in this podcast today. So, Harry, tell everyone about yourself and thank you for being here.
Yeah, thank you very much. Harry Dalton from Dalton Safety. I am the sales director. I have been within the industry for the last 11 years, which seems a very long time. The business actually started by my dad. We specialize in supplying PPE, head to toe, and safety equipment to all types of different industries. But one of our sort of specialities is we actually do site assessments. So we go into businesses and not only recommend better products, but we actually look at the processes before we look at the products to see if there's any way that from a business perspective, they can actually change or improve the processes before actually looking at switching PPE. Which fundamentally is really important because it helps them save money. It helps put the employees first. And yeah, that's something that we sort of prioritize before any supply of any product.
Just for people who may not know the term, what is PPE?
Personal protective equipment.
Okay, so that's good to know. So Harry, you're out and about every day, meeting and talking to customers. So how would you describe the safety standards in the businesses you deal with? And do you think people really feel unsafe?
I think everything depends on one, the size of the company. So quite a lot of corporate companies, it's very difficult to implement safety strategies if you haven't got everyone on board. And the one thing that we are seeing, and we're seeing a lot, is those standards are starting to improve. Um, but it's very difficult, as I said, for a health and safety manager, for example, to look after 150 employees by themselves in one particular site. So to implement standards and to improve standards, it doesn't just come from a manager. It's got to come from the employees as well. But we are starting to see a lot of improvement in all industries as well. So that is a good thing. But there is still a lot more that can be done.
And what do you see as the most significant hazards that people face? I guess that depends from industry to industry. And you told me a lovely story once about going into an organization, and one of the first things you do is you ask to see their first aid kit. So tell us about that.
Yeah, so when we do our site assessments, what we want to do is we want to hear firsthand from the employees, and we want to speak to the employees, and that's why we try and push to go and actually see the actual sites themselves. And you will always get people that will say, I've never been cut, or I've never had a slip, or I've never had a trip. And health and safety, they might have some of the incident reports, but the quickest and easiest way to find out is by asking to see their first aid kit. And 9 times out of 10, they will ask, why do you want to see the first aid kit? And it's sort of one of those where just humor us. Let's see your first aid kit. And a lot of the time, that first aid kit's not full, and it's not got the appropriate first aid equipment in it. And that's when you've got the ability to sort of go back and ask them, your first aid kit's not full, which it tells us that your employees are using that first aid kit because of incidents. They're just
Mhm.
not being reported. So it gives us a bit of an indication and them as a business in straight away where they need to be looking at and how to improve.
Okay. And so what type of hazards do you see mainly when you're walking around businesses? Maybe pick one or two of the type of industries that you deal with. I mean, I know you deal in distribution centers, for example. What would you see there that could be potentially dangerous?
Yeah, so predominantly our core business is has always been safety knives. So we deal with a lot of big warehouse distribution logistics companies. And what's really frightening in those places is the way in which people are cutting. And when I talk about the way in which people are cutting, it's not cutting on a flat surface, it's holding a box in the air and stripping down. And if you think the force that is required to cut material when there's nothing to lean against, it's pretty much double in terms of the force required. So that slip with an open bladed knife,
Okay.
um, that can lead to pretty serious injuries.
So, and in another conversation we had, you mentioned that footwear is really important, that one of the biggest causes of major accidents is people falling, not having the correct footwear, or it being damaged. Tell us about that.
Yeah, so when it comes to footwear, so we do things a little bit differently, and a lot of companies they'll know that they need to improve the footwear side of things. But what they won't do is they won't assess each area. So, for example, a warehouse, they might have an area that has forklifts. Now, every forklift driver should have an S7 boot. They should have the highest level safety footwear because
So
of
I'm interrupting. SN, what's that?
S7. So
S7.
it's the highest standard of safety boot
Okay.
that is there. Um, and what they'll do is they'll just apply that to everyone. And the problem with that is if you've got warehouse guys that are picking, packing, walking up and down, doing 20,000 steps a day, um, you've got to ensure that comfort is taken into consideration. And what a lot of people will do, and we see it all the time, is companies have like 8 or 9 different brands of footwear, not just different types, they've got different brands. And the problem with having loads of different brands is you haven't actually looked at the root of the problem per area. So when we do things, we look at maybe 20 employees at a time. So if a site's got 100 employees, we'll focus on 20 employees before we start implementing anything. And then once those first 20 have agreed that, the boots are comfortable, they work for them, they meet the right standards, um, and the company's happy with them, we'll then move on to the next 20. And also what that does at company level is that prevents a big outlay in cash to buy, 100 pairs of boots all in one go. And it works and it makes a massive difference. The employees feel like their needs and their requirements are being put first, whilst also maintaining the safety levels.
Okay, so what I'm hearing is that you're identifying the risk that each category of employee is going to face, and they're all going to face different risks.
Yeah.
So, in what have you observed about people or employees potentially feeling unsafe? Because I read some interesting stats the other day that 57% of workers in high risk sectors report anxiety linked to safety. In the US, it was 56, the UK, it was 50%. And in Europe, the cost of lost working time due to anxiety, due to feeling unsafe, is 555 billion euros. So, going back to what you were saying about your first aid box, I mean, why do you think that people don't feel safe? And when they do have injuries, why don't they report them?
Yeah, this is a really good question. The so I'll start with the not reporting them. 9 times out of 10, most businesses their employees will have KPIs, they'll have targets, whether that's in a distribution center and they've got to get out 200 orders an hour, or they've got to unpack 200 parcels an hour, whatever it might be. If they get a cut, and I'm using cuts as an example, and it's the same with anything. But if they get a cut or they get an injury, the time that it takes to then fill out an incident report form, to go to health and safety, to deal with all of that, that will go against their numbers, in terms of what they're actually achieving. So it's easier to just go to a first aid kit, get a bandage, get a plaster, whatever it might be, and then crack on with what they need to do. Um, and this real surprising thing, when you ask to see someone's first aid kit, the shock on a health and safety manager's face is quite remarkable, to be fair, because the fact that they don't even know that is concerning, because ultimately they are in charge of making sure that employees have everything that they need, from not just the safety equipment that they need, so the personal protective equipment, but also if something was to happen, that they've got a solution to be able to help that, whether that might be an eye solution to clean their eye if they get a chemical in their eye, or whatever it might be. Um, and even more sort of concerning is the fact that employees will know that all of this is happening, but they won't say anything. They won't say that the first aid kit's empty. And the reason they won't say it is because they know that there'll be questions asked of everyone. Why is the first aid kit being used and there's no incidents been reported? And that's
Okay.
that's a problem.
So, I mean, this is where it overlaps with what I do. I mean, they don't feel psychologically safe to speak up and report an accident or an injury because they fear, well, first of all, because they'll be investigated and they won't meet their targets.
Yep.
And are they afraid of any other repercussions?
I think that, I mean, whenever an incident happens, it should always, and if it is reported, it will always get looked into. Um, but it's more of a case of, are they worried that they might potentially lose their job, depending on how severe, or what the actual incident is. Um, but it's very difficult for when we go and see companies and we speak to employees, you can tell when you're speaking to them, that there are safety concerns around what they might be doing, what their process is, what tools they might be using, but they won't say anything. And they probably won't say anything because, one, it's time. It takes time. This isn't working, or that's not working. They don't feel valued. Their voice doesn't matter. That's probably one of the biggest things. Um, and we were when you and I had a conversation before, when you do team meetings, they're great, right? Because you're being able to relay the same information to everyone all in one go. The problem with team meetings is people don't speak up. You might get one or two, but people do not speak up. And the biggest problem in this industry is that people's voices don't get heard. And, I've been into businesses where I've actually gone, do you know what? That's actually a really good idea. Why have you not taken that to someone higher up? They'll just say no. Okay. But if you've not done it, yeah, but I know that they'll say no. And it's little things like that. And actually some of the ideas that the employees come up with for improving their processes, um, is actually, you know, pretty good, and would actually save the business a lot of money on PPE because they wouldn't need that higher standard level of PPE.
And that also goes to the question about the impact on the bottom line and the spreadsheet then, if you like, that of people not reporting accidents, people not being encouraged to speak up. It's obviously going to impact the business with lost time and injury and having to replace PPE and all of that. So it's really, really important. So if when you go into an organization that's doing physical safety right and therefore psychological safety and they're speaking up and the psychosocial safety because they've got the systems that support all of that, what does a good organization look like?
Um, The key thing for any organization is to have policies in place. And that can stem from things like bullying, all of those different aspects. But and we spoke about it the other day, when somebody comes into the workplace, how do they know that they're going to feel safe? And that's things like having posters around, having videos, having more than one person that might be able to be spoken to. So it's whenever a health and safety manager is around, there needs to be more than one person. It's a little bit like first aid. So most sites have multiple first aiders. Um, and I even my barber, he's qualified in the mental side of things and being able to sort of do not counselling, but be a sounding board. And he actually did that, and he did it specifically for children, because a lot of children don't like having their hair cut
Mm.
for whatever reason, and he noticed a massive difference in his business. And it's just, it's the same. It doesn't matter what industry you're in. We need to have more empathy as human beings, no matter what the workplace is or the environment or what we do. Um, and that's why, yes, it's really important for health and safety managers to have, multiple people around them that can also support their team. But I think it's just as important for employees to support each other, because ultimately they're part of your team. You're doing the job together 8, 12 hours a day. And if you can't talk to the guys that you're working with all day, every day, I think there's a problem.
Yeah, I agree. And a couple of times I've heard you mention the line. Well, first of all, you were talking really about training, so really strong training. And what is the role of the line manager in this? So, given a line manager might be running a team of 20 or 30 or whatever, I mean, how are they going to manage this?
Um, I think that, and this brings me back to the one-to-one, because people don't, you do stuff in a team environment, and you outlay what the company's policies are around safety. You outline what the company's policies are around the mental well-being. So, things like bullying, all of those different things. But do we have conversations individually with our team, about, who they are, what they are, what do they do? Have they got family, kids? How are the kids getting on at school? Those, believe me, those little things and no noticing those things makes it so much easier to manage, especially if you've got somebody, for example, who's never been late to work, never doesn't go out on a Friday after work for drinks with the whole team, and then all of a sudden that stops. But there's no understanding as to why. And our first, and it's just a human reaction is, oh, you've gone soft, or you don't want to have a drink with us, or well, it's not, is everything all right, is the wife okay, are the kids okay, etc., etc. And that brings it to a human level, not just in a working environment level. And I think that's something that a lot of businesses need to look at.
I mean, have you ever been in a position where you felt it was appropriate to mention that you have a situation here where there are things going on and your employees don't feel safe mentioning it, or they feel reluctant to raise this? Have you ever encountered that?
I mean, there's been a couple of times, just around things like the first aid kits. Why are your team not reporting incidents? And when a health and safety manager or an operations manager, or whoever's in charge at that sort of point, that if they can't answer that, then again there's a problem. And the best meetings that I have are guys that are willing to actually accept that there needs to be change. But the guys that push back and fight back, they're the ones where there's sort of a potential problem, which can cause unrest. If they're like that with me, who's been in the industry for a very long time, who's seen pretty much everything you can see from bad to amazing, um, and has worked with businesses where we've implemented safer products and safer solutions, um, to more than half the Fortune 1000, then there's a problem.
So, I mean, how do you go about changing that resistant mindset where, think we're fine as we are, we don't need to change, whatever it is. How do you, is there any one thing that you could suggest they do that produces like the low-hanging fruit result, the instant win?
I think everything depends on um, the reason for us going into the business. I just use uh, knives as an example. We back it up with data and with stats. And when people say, "Oh, don't get cuts, we don't have this, we don't have that," more than 1 million people every year visit A&E for a laceration or a cut. Not
How many?
necessarily
1 million.
more than 1 million. More not now. That's not necessarily to do with knives. That can be anything, but that's 1 in 70 in the UK. Now that's pretty high, just for cuts and lacerations. And it's data, stats and data are great as long as they can be backed up. Um, and sometimes, I've even offered when people, oh, we don't get any cuts, or this knife isn't going to work, or that's not going to work. I offer to come and do the job there for them. I'll come and do a shift at your workplace. So, somebody can obviously supervise me and all that sort of stuff, but I'll come and do it, and I'll be able to see exactly how the guys are operating and the speed at which they might be operating at, and so forth. So there, it's change is the hardest thing in this industry. Changing somebody's mindset is difficult. It's change is difficult. It's people don't like change. And if you push back at somebody who they might have been a health and safety manager for 20 years, um, but we're the safety standards and how safety is changing is at a fast pace. It's happening quickly. The standards are always changing, products are always changing, technology is always changing. Um, and if you don't want to change, your business is going to stand still, and everyone else is going to go forward.
And presumably, if something does happen, right, and there is a serious incident, then what sort of fines could they have in the UK? Or, I mean, presumably even criminal charges if it was really serious.
Yeah, so everything depends. I'll tell you a story in a minute, but just going back to that question. So I remember when I went into a couple of businesses, and this was probably when I first started. So maybe 3 years in, to me doing this job. And did the whole assessment, did the report, did all of that sort of stuff. And we sell a load of knives that are made of ceramic, that last up to 11 times longer, and they're basically the world's first finger-friendly blade. And it would have saved them a lot of cuts and lacerations, and it would have saved them a lot of money. But the problem is the initial outlay is a little bit more expensive than what you would normally buy, say, a Stanley knife for. And they didn't want to part with that sort of money, which is fair enough. Listen, a business, that's completely up to them. The problem is 6 months later, after I think it was about 10 or between 10 and 15 cuts and lacerations that have cost the business over 100 grand, there was no way of them being able to push back on that because they wouldn't have spent that sort of money on the knives themselves, and they would have completely reduced that. And I believe that the health and safety manager was basically fired for negligence on that, because the directors had seen that we'd come in, we'd provided all this information, and yeah, that
So
that
they
was
they wrote their own business case, if you like, and learned. learned the hard way. But
Yeah.
let's talk about small businesses that don't have health and safety managers. I mean, what advice do you give them?
Um, so for small businesses, which we deal with a lot of those as well, and we're only a small business, and even though we're office based, ultimately the safety of all of my employees sits under me. But for small businesses, you're for me, all of your employees need to know everything from a safety aspect. We work with an electrical company. They've got about 11 employees, and they have every single one of them first aid trained. They don't need to, but they have every single one of them first aid trained. And for me, that's important because if they were to be on a job, for example, and one of the first, there's a group of three, but the one who knows first aid is the one that's injured. What do the other two do? So having everybody
Yeah, that's a good
that's
that's a
that's
good point.
so having everybody that's first aid trained for them is great. And constant training and constant repeating, these are our standards, these are our policies. Now, every business has their own safety standards. Some of them will just be a tick box and they'll sort of just be there. And others will be really high. Their safety standards will be really high. You cannot come into the office or onto the work site unless you have this, and this on. Whereas some, you don't need to wear gloves. It's not mandatory, but it's advisable. That's a problem as well, by the way. It should be if anyone that's using a knife should be wearing gloves, period. But we go into a lot of businesses that don't. We go into a lot of businesses where they're okay to wear safety trainers in the warehouse when they're walking through because they work in the office. But actually, hold on a second, what's the actual potential risk? A forklift just happens to crash and fall over, or some shelving falls down, chops someone's toes off, then what do you do?
Yeah, I mean that's pretty terrifying thought. But let's loop back now to the beginning of the fear of feeling unsafe. So, how, what incidents of that? How does that manifest itself in the workplace, where someone is fearful that their physical safety isn't a priority? How does that manifest itself? You talked about no PPE or incorrect PPE. Do they even know they don't have the right PPE?
Um, no, 9 times out of 10, they wear what they get told to wear. And it's that's sort of where we come in terms of being able to help them and advise them, depending on the actual environment. And what looking at the environment is just as important as the actual job itself. Um, but from a we when we speak to people and speak to employees, you can tell in their voice and in their tone of voice and their reactions when they see some of our products, because obviously we demo our products, and when they start asking questions of, how long has this product been on the market and so forth, and you tell them that, this has been around for 13 years, and they turn around and say they've never heard of it, but they and you and they this is amazing. Why haven't we had this before? It it beggars to believe because we work with some really big partners. So there's no reason why these companies wouldn't have heard of us. We've done 11 trade shows at safety events. So we see a lot of businesses and we see a lot of companies that are always looking to improve their safety efforts. But looking to improve your safety efforts, that's a tick box. Look, when you look at companies that they might look for, oh, we need safer safety boots. Oh, we've looked for safer safety boots for you, but we can't find anything that is going to improve on what we've got. You've not been looking hard enough. Is sort of the short answer there. Um, and that's why we always try and get employees involved because ultimately they're the guys doing the job. You as a health and safety manager are there to help provide and implement and improve um, the workplace safety for your employees. Your employees are the ones that are doing the job, so they need to have some contribution into what type of products they would like you as a business to bring in that's going to make them feel safe and help them do the job as best as they can. And that's where we try and do that, and we try and really dive into to the employees and speak with employees. And it also gives us a bit more of a different concept um, of what the business does as well. Because they've got a better understanding because they're doing the job over the health and safety manager that is just basically looking after the potential risks.
And do you think that managers make a connection between somebody losing work because they have depression or anxiety or anything like that, that they're off sick? Do you think they make a connection between being physically safe, or do you just think that person's not very robust?
I definitely think there is probably a lot of that that goes on. And especially like in warehouse environments, where there's probably a lot of temp workers. All the business is probably going to do is just go, we'll get onto our recruitment company and they'll get us somebody else in. Um, but that doesn't help anyone. That doesn't help you as a business because you've then got to retrain someone. You've then got
Rehire.
you've then got to provide extra PPE because they're probably a different size in terms of footwear, high vis, whatever it might be. And this is why if I'm taking on a new hire, I want to know everything about them. I want to know, do they have kids? Do they have family? What potential complications could there be further down the line if they didn't show up for work or if they were to get injured? And every business will have a next of kin on there when they are becoming employed with that company. Um, but not enough is done in terms of actually utilizing the human side of things rather than that person hasn't shown up for work, they're going to get a disciplinary, etc., rather than, even if it's having a one-to-one when they come in, and if they don't return, I want to meet for a coffee. Let's go for a coffee and try and understand, that employee and why it is that they're afraid to come to work, or is it the job? Is it the task? There's a lot of businesses in manufacturing, for example, where they might have fast-moving components like saws and really sharp blades. And to change the blade, you've got to put your hand in there. Now, there's a lot of companies that I've been to where people are definitely worried that if they put their hand in there, and obviously it's not moving, um, but what if, a roller fell off of the machine when their hand's in there and crushed their hand, or what if there was a malfunction and the blade started rotating?
My gosh.
And that I guarantee if you were to put um, a heart monitor on every single one of your employees that is within a high risk environment, you would be able to see how stressful that job is.
That's really interesting. And I bet you nobody's doing that, right?
No.
Okay, so there's still a lot of work to be done there, which is good for us because we can change things, but a bit depressing all the same. Now you've talked a lot about guys, right? So it would be very remiss of me if I if I didn't say, okay, what about the ladies? Because I know that you were involved. Was it last year or the year before where we ran a pink and shrink campaign about getting proper PPE, properly sized PPE for women and not expecting them to wear like small men's sizes. So just talk us through that a bit.
Oh, we see it all the time. I actually did some work with a company probably about a couple of months ago, where we went and did a site assessment, and one of the big things that they had is they had three ladies that had really small feet, and the supplier wouldn't provide size 3 Wellingtons. And they were dealing with hazardous chemicals, so they needed like full suits, literally everything. And I said, look, just leave it with me. Let me see what I can do. Got a pair of size threes, and we sorted it. And I could see on the ladies' faces when I asked the question as to, have you not had somebody come down here with some samples of women's wear that you guys can try on? And they were like, No, we've not seen a rep for 4 years. Not seen a rep for 4 years. Um, and we see it all the time. We when we're supplying workwear for companies, the first question we always ask, have you got females? And if we don't really get it much, but we have in the past, or I certainly have. Um, oh, that's fine. They can just wear what the guys have. And it's like, whoa, okay. How do they feel about that? Oh, well, we're supplying it. Yeah, you are supplying it, and you're legally obliged to supply correct fitting workwear PPE for your employees, no matter what the gender is.
And,
Um,
and those that haven't got it, presumably, because when we were doing that research, we found, for example, people in dangerous situations who were wearing stab vests, men's stab vests, which because of like the female body were leaving gaps around at the bust level where they could easily be stabbed. So,
yeah,
I mean, that must be pretty scary to spend your days working and not feeling protected.
yeah, and even I'm seeing more and more women that work on sites that are pregnant, and they're, there are now some manufacturers that are now manufacturing pregnant PPE. Um, but they're having to go and buy that themselves.
Okay.
And the the problem with that is the company's actually not abiding by the law. So there's a lot of work that needs to be done around safety for both men and women. And when it comes to PPE, women more so, because everything is designed and manufactured to sort of fit males. And we use the example around footwear as well. Most footwear is manufactured to standard. So it doesn't take into whether someone pronates, explanates, whether somebody has wide feet. We've had inquiries where somebody's lost their big toe and it rubs on the steel toe of the toe cap. So they want something that is, and that's a little bit more bespoke, obviously, but what's the business, what's the company doing about that? Are they actually bothered about how the employee feels? Um, and to be fair, the big companies, so that was actually a really big logistics company that had that one issue. Um, Unfortunately, we didn't have anything that would be able to do what they required. But the fact that the company was actually, proactively out there looking for something just for one employee, that sort of says a lot about that company, which is quite good to see.
Yeah, so health and safety managers, if you want input on PPE for women, make sure that you contact Harry and we'll put all the contacts at the end. So just on the last question now to wind up, what would you say to employees who are working in an environment that they feel unsafe? It might be, they're not wearing a heart monitor, but they feel there's stress. What would you suggest they do?
First things first, speak to your teammates. So, and I always say they are your teammates. They're the guys, they're your co-workers, they're your teammates, they're the guys that you're doing the job with. Um, and get their thoughts, get their ideas, especially if let's take somebody who's only been in the job for a year. And 9 times out of 10, you'll have buddies, where you'll have somebody who's been in the job and his experience has been doing it a while, um, and talk to them, get their thoughts. Tell them how you're feeling, that you don't feel, whether that's safe, whether it's I don't feel comfortable doing that, um, whatever it might be. Then it's you need to go to your line manager. So whether that's the ops manager, team leader, or health and safety manager. But the one thing I would say is document it. So if you have um, something that is bugging you and you've got something on your mind, verbally go and speak to somebody, but also send an email follow up on that. So, confirming what you spoke about, what they said they were going to do, whether it was an issue, whatever it might be, always make sure that you've done it verbally and you've put it in writing as well. Because if that doesn't get looked into and it keeps reoccurring, you've got something to then go and
Yeah.
miss out those line managers and go to senior level. Because as I said at the start, and I always say it, no employee should go home from work any different to how they came. And that doesn't matter whether it's a physical side or the mental side. Um, you know, we all get stressed. That's just it. Yeah, that's life. But your working environment from a safety aspect should not be a stressful thing.
No, I agree. And certainly my input for line managers, health and safety managers, is that top priority is to create a culture of psychological safety where people feel that they can speak up without reprisals or retaliation. And above all, that you have got reporting systems that don't intimidate people. I think that's really important that, people will feel they'll miss their targets or that they might impact their job and that you make it a really easy and painless process. But Harry, it's been great having this talk with you and doing this podcast. Do you want to just give some details about how people can reach you? And we'll put a slide at the end so people have got it in writing. Anything?
Yep, so you can reach me directly on Harry, so HARRY at daltonsafety.com, or you can reach the team on inquiries at daltonsafety.com. Our website is www.daltonsafety.com.
Okay, perfect. Great. Well, thank you everybody for listening. It's been a pleasure. And don't hesitate to give us your feedback. Thanks to Harry for being here. And obviously, if you need services from either of us, we will be delighted to help you. Thank you very much indeed. Goodbye.
Thank you.
Bye. Thanks everyone for listening to the podcast with Harry. I hope you found it enjoyable and interesting. And obviously, if you need any further support on the physical safety aspect, please don't hesitate to get in touch with Harry. He's already given you his email address and we're dropping a slide in at the end. And obviously, in terms of 3+ services, you're very welcome to reach out. We are practitioners and certified in ISO 45003, which is psychosocial safety. So able to look at your systems and to see how you stack up. And obviously, we provide training for managers and supervisors on creating and leading inclusive and safe teams. We also are trauma-informed coaches, and we can offer support for victims of any negative experiences that they might have had. So once again, please don't hesitate to reach out. It's dorothy.dalton at 3plusinternational.com. And thank you very much. Bye.